Hello again, and what is hip, and welcome back to another video, a long overdue video, but wow, can you believe we're already at the end of 2023? I first got this tree back here a year ago, and it's been a whole year since I put it up in my videos, and it's just crazy how quickly time has been flying. But today I wanted to talk about my favorite Nintendo Switch games that came out in 2023. This is going to be my my top 4 Nintendo Switch games because I couldn't quite think of 5 that I was like, oh, these are the best Nintendo Switch games. You know, I couldn't think of 5 that really stuck out, and so I picked 4. And I do have an honorable mention in there as well, which could have been the 5th, but I just didn't deem it good enough to make it to the top 5, in my opinion. But we're going to start off with, this might be cheating a little bit, but it did come out this year. It's a remake, and it's a remake of Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life on the GameCube. And that is Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life on the Nintendo Switch. And Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life is one of my favorite games of all time. It was my very first Harvest Moon game, my very first farming simulator game, and I played it to death. And the funny thing is, I really didn't even play that far into the game. I would play a couple years into the story, and then I would just start over because I just had so much fun when I was younger. It didn't review very well. It's always been kind of the odd one out in the Harvest Moon series. It's very polarizing. It's either your favorite or it's your least favorite. It tends to be the majority's least favorite. But, you know, the creator of Harvest Moon actually said in an interview that Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life was the game that really was the closest to matching what his idea of Harvest Moon was. And it's a game where you play through your whole life. You start moving into your farm, getting married, and then you play all the way until you die. And you have your kid, and you watch him grow up and move out and all of that stuff. And the whole town that you're in grows alongside you. It's magical. It is the most in-depth social simulator game I've ever played, you know, with the exception of, you know, like maybe the Shin Megami Tensei series and such. But yeah, is it repetitive? It is, but it's meant to be. And this remake really is quite good. It's a good remake of the game. The art style, I prefer the original because they kind of cartoonized it a little bit. I'm glad they didn't go the full chibi route like Friends of Mineral Town that came out, I think, last year on the Switch. It's kind of a mixture of kind of the more cartoony and the more realistic look of the GameCube version and PlayStation 2 version. But this is a wonderful game, a wonderful life. So many wonderful, lovable characters in this game, and it's fantastic. You can get it for pretty cheap too, and it's one that I really recommend, especially if you're looking for a different experience in the farming simulators, because I've played many farming simulators and none of them have held my interest like this one did. This one is just so unique. But know what you're getting into. You know, you're not fighting monsters, you're not doing anything like that. You're fishing, you're doing archaeology, you're talking to the folks, you're growing old, you're forming relationships with the townsfolk. And it's just a wonderful game of the circle of life and death, and it's really, really wholesome and one that I completely recommend. Now we're getting to my second favorite game of the year, and I didn't know what to do because I also feel like this one is cheating, but again, it did come out this year. It's a remake once more, and I think I would have made this my favorite, but I didn't feel completely right giving my top 2023 Switch game to a game that is essentially a remake of one that came out in the 90s. So that's why this is my second favorite. And this is from the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection. And I'm going to talk specifically about the game Final Fantasy V, another odd one out in a series. So, Final Fantasy V never came out in the United States. Well, when it was originally released, it came out in Japan on the Super Famicom, and eventually it came to the States as a part of I think the Final Fantasy Origins or Final Fantasy, one of the Final Fantasy collections on the PlayStation 1. That was the first time we saw it. But we never saw it in its original state. And the remaster collection here is really a great collection of the original Final Fantasy games. You know, they do such a good job at kind of matching the original art style and modernizing it to a sense. And I would argue that this is probably the best way to play Final Fantasy V. Yes, there is the Game Boy Advance version that had a couple extra dungeons, I think an extra dungeon, a couple extra jobs and whatnot, but this one looks so good and it plays really great as well. And you have the benefit of it being on the widescreen, but the big thing is the specially arranged soundtrack, completely redone, and it is phenomenal. It is great. I actually played it with the rearranged soundtrack instead of the original 16-bit soundtrack, which is not something I do very often unless the music is very good, and the music is extremely good. But getting to the game, Final Fantasy V it's the odd one out. You know, we never got it in the States. It's argued that the story isn't as in-depth as Final Fantasy IV, and you know, it wasn't as good as Final Fantasy IV. That's what it's known as. However, I would beg to differ to an extent. You know, it's a game where you play as 4 characters. Each has their own. You can choose jobs, different jobs for each of them, and it's so cool. It's so in depth. You can have so many different combinations of jobs and playthroughs, and it's really, really cool. But you stick with those 4 characters throughout the whole game, and you really get to know each one of them and what they did with the animations and the storytelling. I would say that this is some of the deepest connections I've developed with a Final Fantasy character out of all of the games. It's really, really good. Yeah, the story isn't quite as in-depth, but there's still a pretty good story there. With some incredibly strong characters and just really great writing as well. But really the gameplay really is the star of this game. It's so addicting, it's so fun. I actually found myself enjoying random battles because there's a very high encounter rate in this game, but I enjoyed these battles because the job class is so much fun, and it's so fun switching and leveling up each different job class and ability, trying to get them all. You got the summons, which look great as well. It's just a really fantastic game, and I would really put it up there as one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm so happy I got to experience this finally in the year 2023. I've played most of the Final Fantasy games, but that was one that I had not. Is it cheating a little bit that this is my second favorite Switch game of 2023? Perhaps, but I don't care. It's that good, and I want everybody to experience Final Fantasy V. It is a wonderful game, one that is overlooked, and that is a downright shame. Now, before we get to my favorite game of 2023, my favorite Switch game of 2023, we gotta talk about our honorable mention, and that is none other than The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And some of you might be falling out of your seats right now wondering, why is that not your favorite game of 2023? Why is that not even on your top 4 list? Well, this might be a video for another day. There's a lot to go into, but I was not the biggest fan of Breath of the Wild. I loved Breath of the Wild, but there was something about it that was just so drastically different than the Zelda that I knew. And I appreciated those changes, but I found myself really missing a lot of the foundations that were developed in the prior Zelda games, like a story, some sort of linearity or structure. And so when they announced Tears of the Kingdom, I was hesitant. and I was scared it was going to be more of the same. And we got it, and indeed it was more of the same. However, it was definitely more to my liking. This game is huge. It is perfectly crafted. I mean, it's a great game, don't get me wrong. However, I was just so overwhelmed with all the things to do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there just feels like there's a little less structure, and it's a little too free for all for my liking. I would love some sort of linearity, not for the whole game, but just something. The story is definitely more of a thing in this, which I really do appreciate. I love like the underworld and above world and all the different, levels of the worlds that they have. It's a huge game, and it's really, really fun. And it's beautiful too. It's just more of the same. That being said, I'm still very much enjoying this game, but I didn't find myself loving it as much as these other ones, especially my number one choice. But again, it's a great game with just, I think, with no strings attached, literally. And also the whole building of vehicles and things, I also wasn't a big fan of that. The whole emphasis on construction kind of made it feel more like a Playbox tech demo kind of thing, in an odd sort of way. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. In some ways, I would even prefer the original Breath of Wild over this. However, I do recognize that overall, it's probably a better game than the original Breath of the Wild. But yeah, a great game. Definitely deserves to be mentioned as some of the best games of 2023, but just not my personal favorite. So that brings us to our number one Switch game of the year. And crazily enough, it was the first Switch game I played this year. And that is none other than Fire Emblem Engage. I guess you could say this is also another odd one out in its own series. A lot of people bashed on this for the lack of story in comparison to Three Houses, the first Fire Emblem game on the Switch. And I never played that game. I played it very, very briefly. But I became a little overwhelmed. It was at a time of my life where there's so much going on, so much work, that I was just like, I don't know if I can dedicate all this time to another social simulator. I love social simulators. They're great. They're some of my favorite games, especially the Persona series and all of that. But there are times when you just don't want that. And that's where this game came in. It came at the perfect time. I was in the middle of school. And I love the art style and the colors. I mean, the colors are fantastic. And it's a beautiful looking game. And I decided I would give it a shot because the trailers and all that, it looked more appealing to me than Three Houses. Graphics-wise, purely graphics-wise. And so I got it. And I was a little scared that there wouldn't be any story at all, or that characters wouldn't be likable or whatever. But to ease my worries, I was immediately pulled in. There is a story. There is definitely no lack of story. Is it the most in-depth story? Absolutely not. However, I would argue that it is the perfect amount of story for this kind of game. There is a story there that motivates you to keep going forward, and really that's all it needs to be. And there are a couple of moments of emotional moments where it's like, oh wow, that's intense. That's pretty crazy. So there are moments like that. The characters in this game are so well written. I was actually very surprised about this. The characters are wonderful, every single one of them, and they have these, I guess you could call social simulator light aspects thrown in the game, where you can talk to your team members during breaks and stuff like that, but it's not very in-depth. In fact, I would say it's not deep enough. It's very, very light. You'll have different stages of friendships with some, and or you get to those different stages and they're just like, I really love hanging out with you, and that's it. They say like a couple of sentences. So that's pretty lame. They definitely could have taken that 10 steps further. But the gameplay is so addicting, just like all the Fire Emblem games, the rock, paper, scissors, all of that. It's very, very fun and very addicting, and you just find yourself wanting to get into more battles and more battles. And the hub world is the perfect size. It's not that big. 3 houses, it was huge. It was so hard, and you got lost. And I wasn't the biggest. It wasn't for me at that time. But this is nice and compact, but it still has all the meat, all the depth, with the exception of the social simulator aspect. But when you really just want to play through a game, sometimes it's nice not to have all the different winding paths and the little flow charts of, if you do this, this happens. If you say this, this happens. Sometimes you just don't want that. Sometimes you want to get the same story everybody else does, and hope that it's a good one. And this one is a good one. It's a great one. I love this game. I spent so much time with it. It was my first Switch game of the year. I actually reviewed it, or I did first impressions of it, which I've never done before. I loved it that much. And the music also, don't let me forget, fantastic soundtrack. But yeah, this was my favorite Switch game of 2023. It is so extremely good. Give it a try. It's not for everybody, but don't listen to the mass critiques and the reviews. Try it for yourself. If you're a strategy game fan, you're gonna love this. It's very, very good. So there you have it. Those are my favorite Switch games of 2023. What did you think of my choices? I know they're definitely not probably what the majority would pick, especially with Tears of the Kingdom not even making the list. But, you know, these are games that I enjoyed. By no means is this fact. They're just games that I enjoyed, and I wanted to share with you guys and, you know, maybe introduce you or spark some interest in a game that you maybe really didn't think too much of before. But I found so much joy in these games. Really helped make 2023 a great year, and I'm looking forward to next year as well. There's going to be lots of surprises for Nintendo in the coming year. But yeah, that's it. What are your favorite Switch games of 2023? And what is my favorite game of 2023? Well, I will upload a video of that probably in the next week or so, talking about my favorite video game of 2023. And it's not a Switch one. It's for the PlayStation 5, and that'll be the hint there. But I've been looking for an excuse to talk about it for such a long time. It really made a wonderful impact on me. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all are having a fantastic December. I'm on break now, so I'm gonna try and upload a whole bunch and get some in the backlog as well, so I can kind of upload more consistently. I've needed this break. School can just be deafening at times. But thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.